"Mom, is the laundry done yet? And don't take too long with lunch." My son's voice echoed all the way into the kitchen. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was only 9:30 in the morning. I hadn't even finished cleaning up the breakfast dishes, and he was already worried about lunch. I silently turned off the faucet, wiped my wet hands on my apron, and walked toward the living room. "The laundry will be done soon," I said. "But speaking of chores, the upstairs bathroom is still dirty from yesterday. Did either of you get to it?" My daughter-in-law, Jessica, who was lounging on the sofa scrolling through her phone, answered without even bothering to look up. Her voice was thick with annoyance. "What? I figured you'd take care of it since you were here." For a moment, I was speechless. I couldn't find the words to respond. What? What am I even doing here? Ever since my first grandchild was born, I'd been summoned for every holiday, every long weekend. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Memorial Day. It was always framed as coming to help, but that help always meant cooking, laundry, cleaning, and even chauffeuring the grandkids to their activities. And yet, I never once heard a simple, "thank you." It was just expected of me, a part of the routine. "You can still get around, can't you? It's such a lifesaver that you're so healthy." In the beginning, I tried to convince myself that those words meant they needed me, that I was valued. But somewhere along the line, their reliance twisted into entitlement. My help became an obligation. My presence became a free service. This past summer, when I heard that the entire extended family would be gathering for the 4th of July, I made a quiet decision. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't let my life end with me being nothing more than the convenient one. So, I started documenting everything. Every dismissive word in the kitchen. Every sharp reprimand that echoed through the house. Every late-night chore that was pushed onto me. I kept a diary on my phone, complete with photos. I carefully noted who said what, the tone of their voice, the look on their face. And then, the night of the big Thanksgiving dinner arrived. The family was all there. The living room filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. In the middle of it all, I quietly stood up and picked up the television remote. "Everyone, I have something I want to show you." The room fell silent. "Look!" Projected onto the large screen were the records from my phone. A gallery of notes and pictures. "What is this?" someone whispered. "No way, Mom," I heard my son mutter. But I continued, my voice steady and calm. "This is a record," I said, addressing the room. "A record of how the people I thought were my families have been treating me." My relatives were stunned into silence. My son and his wife stared at the floor, their faces pale. I would not be silent anymore. In this family, I hadn't been treated as a mother, but as a tool. But for tonight, just for this one night, I wanted to reclaim my own existence. With my own words. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for over 30 years, I taught mathematics at a middle school in Cleveland. I was never the kind of teacher who ruled with an iron fist. I preferred a gentler approach. I didn't scold students for making mistakes. I believed in working with them to understand why they got the wrong answer. It's a small point of pride for me that I still receive Christmas cards from some of my former students. My husband, Walter, died suddenly of a massive stroke when I was 58. It came without any warning, without any sign. I'd stepped out of the room for just a few minutes, and when I came back, he had collapsed. He was gone before the paramedics arrived. The last thing I ever said to him was that morning, as he was leaving for work. "Don't forget your scarf, Walter. It's cold out." I never imagined that would be our final conversation. After the funeral, I was lost. The house felt cavernous, the silence deafening. I didn't know how to fill the empty hours, and for a long time, I just drifted through my days in a daze. Eventually, I retired at 65 and continued to live alone in the house. Walter had left me, an old but sturdy clapboard house on the outskirts of a small town in rural Ohio. My Social Security check is about $1,400 a month. It's not a lot, so I can't afford any luxuries. But I grow my own vegetables in a small garden out back. and I visit the public library once a week. It's a simple, quiet life. And through it all, the one anchor I had left in the world was my only son, Michael. Michael went to college on the East Coast, got a good job in New York City right after graduation, and married a few years later. Today, he and his wife, Jessica, have two beautiful children and a lovely house in a New Jersey suburb. For me, seeing him build that life was the greatest joy imaginable. I truly believed that my family's happiness was my own. But a few years ago, something began to change. First, the phone calls became less frequent. Then, the Christmas cards arrived with nothing but a pre-printed, generic message. His excuses for not visiting for the holidays became shorter and more abrupt. "Work is just too crazy, Mom. Can't get away." I told myself it was fine, that this was just how it was for busy young couples these days. Then, one summer, Michael called me out of the blue. "Mom," he said, "can you come stay with us for a week or so? The kids are out of school and we're just swamped." I was thrilled. I carefully packed a large cardboard box with potatoes and zucchini from my garden and several jars of my homemade strawberry jam. I bought my ticket and rode the Amtrak all the way from Ohio to New York, my heart filled with anticipation. The welcome I received, however, was not what I had imagined. When I arrived at their house, Jessica barely made eye contact. "Oh, hi, Eleanor. Your room is this way?" she said, gesturing vaguely down the hall. Before I could even set down my luggage, she pointed to a couple of rotisserie chickens on the kitchen counter. "You can use these for dinner tonight." "Oh, don't be silly. I can cook for everyone," I offered. "No, it's fine," she said curtly. "This is easier. It's too much trouble." I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just stressed or tired from a long day. But the next morning, my role became clear. I was expected to prepare breakfast, do the laundry, clean the house, and even drive the grandkids to and from their summer day camp. I was no longer a guest. I was the unpaid housekeeper. Late at night, after I'd finished the last of the dinner dishes, I'd walk into the living room hoping to ask about the plan for the next day. But they'd be sitting on the sofa, watching television, acting as if I were invisible, as if I were just part of the furniture. One day, the exhaustion caught up with me, and I came down with a bad cold. When I told Michael I wasn't feeling well, he just laughed. "Come on, Mom. Don't be so dramatic." It was in that moment that the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. "Oh," I thought, "I'm not their mother anymore. I'm just a convenient person to have around." I thought back to when Michael was a little boy, his face lighting up as he told me, "Mom, your grilled cheese is the best in the whole world." I remembered the time he was homesick from school with a fever, and I sat by his bed reading to him. He had squeezed my hand and whispered a tiny, "Thank you," his touch so warm and sincere. That little boy was gone. He wasn't here anymore. Even so, a part of me refused to give up hope. Perhaps that is the nature of a mother, to always believe, against all evidence, that you are doing it for your child. But it took me far too long to realize that my love was being exploited, that my desire to help had turned me into a resource to be used and discarded. In recent years, whenever I visited Michael's house in New Jersey, I was no longer welcomed as a mother. It used to be that as soon as I walked through the door, my grandchildren would come running, shouting, "Grandma." Michael and Jessica would greet me with smiles and say, "Thanks so much for coming all this way." But now, the moment the door opens, the first words out of Jessica's mouth are, "Oh, Eleanor, perfect timing. Michael and I both have to work late today. Can you watch the kids?" It's not a request. It's an assumption, spoken with the casual authority of someone giving an order. I always smile and say, "Of course, dear," while my heart sinks a little further. On one such day, I spent the entire time on my feet. I changed diapers, prepared baby food, cleaned the house, and tried to keep two energetic children entertained from morning until night. For lunch, I quickly ate a leftover sandwich while standing over the kitchen sink. That evening, Michael came home. When I heard him say, "I'm home," I felt a small flicker of hope. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would say, "Thanks for everything today, Mom." But all he said was, "Is dinner ready yet?" At that moment, I truly no longer knew why I was there. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Memorial Day weekend, whenever there was a national holiday, my son, his wife, and my grandchildren would descend upon my small house in Ohio. In the beginning, I was overjoyed. The house would fill with their voices. "Mom, we're home! Grandma!" My grandkids would shriek as they ran into my arms. Back then, I felt a deep sense of pride that my home was a place of comfort and rest for my family. But that was a long time ago. Over the last 3 years, those visits have changed completely. Now, when I open the front door, the first thing Jessica says, with a bright, artificial smile, is, "Eleanor, we'll need you to clear out a shelf in the fridge." We brought a ton of stuff from the city. Before they even unpack, Michael collapses onto the sofa with his phone, and the kids start running wild. "Grandma, I'm thirsty." "Grandma, I'm hungry." I instinctively turn and head for the kitchen, peering into the refrigerator to start planning the first of many meals. From that point on, my life becomes a blur of cooking 3 meals a day. The laundry piles up in mountains, clothes for 4 people that I have to wash, dry, and fold. One afternoon, Jessica said with a laugh, "You know, Eleanor, you're so good at laundry and ironing. Even my delicates are perfect. Not a single wrinkle. You're better than a machine." I was standing at the ironing board at that moment, and I paused, my hand frozen in mid-air. I was holding one of her delicate, lace-trimmed bras. An indescribable feeling washed over me. I couldn't tell if it was sadness or anger, or some hollow mixture of the two. But the final, decisive blow came one night from my own son. "Hey, Mom," Michael said casually. "What's for breakfast tomorrow? We're trying to get an early start." "Will you?" His words sent a sharp, physical pain through my chest. Why am I here? I cook, I clean, I babysit. Is this what it means to be a mother? Or have I simply become the help? One day, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Biss's Ware, Gable, saw me bringing in laundry from the line and spoke to me softly. "Eleanor, you're always working so hard when your family is here. Are you sure you're not overdoing it a little?" I just laughed and brushed it off, but her words stuck with me. "You've become like their live-in helper, dear," she had added gently. "For family, they seem to treat you like a stranger." That one sentence echoed in my mind for weeks. Was I truly a member of the family anymore, or had my existence faded into the background? A shadow to be called upon only when it was convenient? The doubt grew heavier with each passing day. It wasn't always like this. Michael used to tell me, "Mom, your pot roast is the best. You can't get anything this good in New York." Just hearing those words gave me the energy to stand in the kitchen for hours. But lately, it's different. Now, he says things like, "Mom, could you maybe use a little less salt?" We're used to lighter food these days. The words themselves are gentle, but the underlying message is painfully clear. Your old ways, the things you used to do for me, they aren't good enough anymore. One Thanksgiving, when all our relatives were gathered, Jessica announced with a loud laugh, "Michael's mom is better than a housekeeper. She does absolutely everything for us." "We're so lucky." The room filled with polite chuckles. Everyone took it as a joke, but all I could do was stand there and force a smile onto my face. I never imagined that being turned into a punchline would feel so much worse than never being thanked at all. My grandchildren used to wrap their little arms around my neck and follow me everywhere I went. "Grandma, let's take a bath together." "Grandma, I want to sleep in your bed." Those simple words were my most precious treasures. But that has changed too. Just the other day, I was in the kitchen preparing an afternoon snack. I turned to my grandson and asked gently, "Would you like a cookie?" I expected him to look up and smile, the way he always used to. Instead, he just glanced at my face, shook his little head, and said firmly, "I want mommy." His words felt like a knife twisting in my heart. "Oh, okay, honey," I managed to whisper, but inside I was weeping. Children are perceptive. They absorb everything around them. He must have sensed, in a way only a child can, how the other adults in the house treated me. I wasn't grandma anymore. I was becoming the help. Last year, before Thanksgiving, the familiar call came from Michael. "Hey Mom, we're coming for the week. We're all looking forward to a relaxing family holiday, so we'll see you Tuesday." His voice was casual, but the expectation was clear. Still, a foolish part of me felt a flicker of hope. The thought of seeing my grandchildren's faces made my heart ache with love. So, as always, I threw myself into preparations. I went to the farmer's market for the freshest vegetables, had the butcher save me the best cut of beef, and picked up their favorite pastries from the local bakery. I wanted everything to be perfect. I made sure to get their favorite snacks too. I washed all the bedding and meticulously scrubbed the living room and the entryway. I was preparing the house as if it were a cozy inn, ready to welcome cherished travelers. And then, the first day arrived. I'd been in the kitchen since dawn, preparing oatmeal from scratch, warming a pot of fresh apple cider, and putting the finishing touches on a breakfast casserole for everyone. Suddenly, I heard hushed voices coming from down the hall. It's seriously such a lifesaver. Coming home and having everything just done for you for free. I froze, my hand still gripping the serving spoon. The lightness in her tone, mixed with an unmistakable note of entitlement, was painfully clear. Even though I didn't want to hear what came next, my body wouldn't move. My mother-in-law? She's better than a hired housekeeper, I swear. Perhaps it was meant as a joke, something to get a laugh. But when I heard the ripple of chuckles from the other relatives who had gathered in the living room, a chill went straight down my spine. In that single instant, my heart turned to ice. Better than a housekeeper. Those words had instantly transformed my role as a mother into that of a service provider. I set the spoon down on the counter and stepped back into a corner of the kitchen. No tears came. There was only a quiet, tearing pain deep inside my chest. But I didn't want anyone to notice, so I tried to act as I always did. I tried to play the part of the kind mother, but I suddenly realized that my kindness had been warped into something they now saw as an entitlement, something they simply expected. I plated the food and called the grandchildren to the table, and they came running with bright smiles on their faces. "Grandma, thank you." Their smiles, their voices, their words, they held none of the distance I felt from the others. But for me, the distance between myself and my family had suddenly become a chasm I could see was my own eyes. Who am I, really? The question brought with it a quiet wave of despair. I slipped back into the kitchen, careful not to draw any attention. Something was aching deep inside me, a dull, persistent throb, but I couldn't let it show. I began gathering the plates and bowls left on the dining table, carrying them one by one to the sink and submerging them in the hot, soapy water. I picked up the sponge and began to wash, not with force, but methodically, silently, just as I always did. The greasy frying pan, the plate with a few leftover bits of bacon, the children's small spoons. It felt as if the entire day had been etched onto each of those dishes. When I finished, I quietly arranged the clean dishes in the drying rack, wiped down the table with a cloth, and carefully dried up the water droplets that had spilled onto the kitchen floor. After that, I went to the bathroom and began hanging up the towels everyone had used. Each one was damp, still holding the warmth of their skin. I happened to glance into the living room and saw Michael with his arm around Jessica's shoulders, both of them laughing at some comedy show on the television. I tried to form a single word, something simple like, "You know, I could use a little help," or "I'm feeling a bit tired today," just a small phrase. But the words got stuck in my throat, and I swallowed them back down, unsaid. Instead, a long, quiet sigh escaped from my chest. It should have been a tiny sound, but inside me, it echoed like the creak of a heavy, rusted door. And then I returned to the kitchen and started preparing for the next day's breakfast. Without anyone noticing, without anyone expecting anything different. For dinner that evening, I decided to make my mother's pot roast. A taste I hadn't tried to replicate in years. It was the dish my own mother, Michael's grandmother, used to make for us when she was still alive. The seasoning, the temperature of the oven, the precise cooking time. I tasted it again and again as it simmered, until I was finally satisfied. It tastes just like it used to, I thought to myself. As I placed the steaming platter on the dinner table, I felt a small flicker of pride in the rich, savory aroma that filled the room. But Michael picked up his fork, took a single bite, and then murmured, almost to himself, "It's a little rich, Mom. We're trying to watch our sodium these days." There was no accusation in his voice, no hint of blame. He was just stating a fact, a simple matter of his current preference. But for me, his words were a quiet, deep, and painful stab. Thank you. Why had that one simple phrase become so impossibly distant? I didn't say anything. I just put on a smile. To anyone watching, I probably looked like a mother who didn't mind, who wasn't bothered in the least. But behind that smile, I was taking a slow, deep breath, trying to push down the ache that was blooming in my chest. Later that night, as I sat alone in the kitchen eating a small portion of the leftover pot roast, a thought drifted into my mind. Who did I even make this for? That evening, long after everyone else had gone to bed, I found myself sitting on a chair in the kitchen. I hadn't turned on the lights, relying only on the soft glow from the street lamp outside the window as I held a cup of lukewarm tea in my hands. From outside, I could faintly hear the chirping of crickets in the distance. My mind drifted back to the past, to a time when Walter was still alive and well. He used to say to me with a warm laugh, "Let's make sure this house is a place where our family can always come home and feel safe." I had repeated those words to myself countless times over the years, even after the children grew up and moved away, even after Walter passed on before me. I always wanted this house to remain that kind of place. But now, sitting here alone in the quiet kitchen, a question bubbled up from the deepest part of my heart. "Walter, can this place still be called a home?" I whispered into the darkness, my voice so small that no one could hear. Of course, there was no reply. And yet, deep inside my chest, I could almost see Walter's gentle smile. What would he say to me now if he could see me like this? Lost in that thought, I took a small, quiet sip of my lukewarm tea. It was the third night of their visit. I had been on my feet since morning, cooking, washing dishes, looking after the children. Before I knew it, it was time to start preparing dinner again. I could feel a fever coming on. My body felt unsteady, and my head was heavy with every breath I took. "Maybe I'll just sit down, for a moment," I murmured to myself, and I lowered my weary body onto the old wooden chair in the corner of the kitchen. I closed my eyes for a second, and Walter's words echoed in my mind. "Let's make sure this house is a place where our family can always come home and feel safe." "Walter, can you hear me?" The rhythmic tap 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 of a knife on the cutting board, the sizzle of oil in a hot pan, the distant sound of my grandchildren's laughter. All of it sounded as if it were coming from another world. It felt as though I were submerged deep underwater, the edges of every sound blurred and indistinct, time itself slowing to a crawl. Huh. I let out a small breath and pulled a handkerchief from my apron pocket to gently wipe my forehead. It was the first time I noticed how cold my own sweat felt. It was a chilling dampness that seemed to seep out from the very marrow of my bones. A shiver ran down my spine, and a tingling numbness spread to the tips of my fingers. My vision blurred slightly. I squinted at the kitchen lights, trying to focus on the stove and the sink where I had stood countless times before. But in that moment, they looked completely alien to me, like a place I had never seen. "Exie, please just let me rest for a little while longer," I pleaded silently, to no one in particular, as I gently closed my eyes again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was only resting. I had just finally managed to sit down when footsteps approached from the other side of the door. Michael appeared from the living room. He glanced at his watch for a moment, and then his eyes landed on me. His expression seemed to say, "You're not done yet?" He didn't seem to notice the sweat on my brow or the exhaustion etched onto my face. Then, without a word, he lifted his chin slightly and motioned with his eyes toward the kitchen sink. The gesture felt like an order. "Mom, can you take care of this?" At his words, I instinctively lowered my gaze. He had phrased it as a question, but there wasn't a shred of consideration in it. Instead, It felt loaded with an unconscious pressure, a tone that implied, "You will. Of course you will." From behind him, I could hear the sound of the television and the laughter of my grandchildren. Am I even a part of this family? I wondered. Or am I just a convenient object placed here for their use? All this, while my body was screaming that it had reached its limit. I slowly pushed myself to my feet and walked into the living room. Who am I in this house? The moment I asked, I felt the air in the room instantly grow cold. In the heavy silence, Jessica laughed lightly. "What do you mean, who are you?" "Your grandma, of course." Her words struck me with a sharp, physical pain. It was meant as a joke, I'm sure, but its casual, dismissive nature made it cut all the deeper. I didn't say anything else. I simply turned and walked back to the kitchen. And as I began to wash the dishes, one by one, I made a silent resolution. I'm not going to be silent anymore. I had only been sitting, just for a moment, to lean my back against a chair. But the atmosphere in the house was such that even that small moment of rest seemed to require someone else's permission. "Mom, can you take care of this?" That one phrase seeped into my heart like a cold stain. It wasn't a request, it sounded like a command. And there was no surprise or hesitation in it, just an unspoken assumption. "This is what you do, isn't it?" I suddenly remembered my own voice, from when I was much younger, back when I was a young mother, still chasing after a little Michael. Even as I relied on my own mother for help, I had made a silent vow to myself. When I become a mother, I will not become my children's maid. I want to be a part of their family, someone who stands beside them. I will support them, but I will never be someone they can just order around. Ah. Those words now echoed in my mind with a bitter irony. I had wanted to be a support, but I had become someone whose support was simply taken for granted. I could feel my spirit beginning to fray, making a quiet, grinding sound. Who am I in this house? My quiet question was like a small pebble dropped onto the dining table. It made no ripple, sinking without a trace into anyone's consciousness. No one answered. Only the sound of the television continued its inappropriately cheerful chatter. Even my grandchildren's laughter felt distant, as if it were coming from another room. Everyone acted as if they hadn't heard me, their eyes fixed on their drinks, deliberately avoiding my gaze. Or perhaps they were pretending not to hear. Amidst it all, one person, Jessica, lifted a small cookie to her lips, chewed it slowly, and glanced at me. Then, in a voice devoid of any real emotion, she said, "Why? Eleanor, your grandma, of course." Her lips curved just slightly at the corners, a half smile. Was it just my imagination, or was there a cold, mocking tone hidden in that smile? The air in the room felt as if it had frozen solid, but even in that icy atmosphere, not a single person said a word. I just stared down at my hands, feeling my chest tighten as if it were being squeezed in a vice. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice or lose my temper. Instead, I slowly rose to my feet, turned, and looked directly at my son, who was sitting across from me. How many years had it been since I had looked him straight in the eyes like this? He seemed startled for a moment, his eyes widening, but then he quickly looked away. I spoke quietly, but with a clarity that could not be ignored. "Grandma is not another name for a convenient person who will do anything you ask." The moment the words left my lips, the air in the room grew heavier still. My voice hadn't trembled, but I could hear the sound of something deep inside me finally cracking and giving way. Neither Jessica nor Michael said anything in response. I said nothing more. I slowly sat back down in my chair and looked at my hands again. But I knew that my one quiet sentence had surely sent a small, unsettling ripple through the heart of everyone in my family. I, Eleanor Vance, stood frozen in the corner of the kitchen. That night, my son's words and my daughter-in-law's casual comment pierced my heart and lodged there, refusing to come out. Grandma is not another name for a convenient person who will do anything you ask. That single sentence had changed something in me, but I did not scream. I did not break down in tears. Instead, a quiet, unshakable resolve settled deep within me. I will not let my story end like this. The very next morning, I began carrying a small digital voice recorder with me. I tucked it deep inside my handbag, which I left on a side table in the corner of the living room. It was perfectly positioned, and no one would ever notice it as it silently documented the daily conversations that swirled around me. Mom, could you put some ketchup on the table? You haven't vacuumed in here yet? You know, older people, they just don't get it sometimes, do they? Each word was like a cold, sharp needle pricking my ear, and each one was captured, preserved as a permanent record. From that day forward, I secretly began to record. To be even more careful, I took the tiny device and gently concealed it inside a decorative tissue box, cover on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to expose anyone or start a war. I just needed to know. I needed confirmation that what I was feeling wasn't just my own imagination, that I wasn't being overly sensitive. One afternoon, while I was in the middle of prepping vegetables for dinner, I heard a voice drift in from the living room. Honestly, what good is she? All she can really do is cook. It was Jessica, my son's wife. The words were spoken with a light, dismissive laugh, but the hand holding the paring knife trembled just for a second. On another day, my granddaughter's small voice was captured on the recording. "Mommy, Grandma smells a little funny." I didn't say a word. But in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to smile, nor could I let a single tear fall. I simply reached over and quietly pressed the stop button. The thought that my very existence, without me doing anything at all, could be a source of discomfort for someone else. It felt like a vice tightening around my chest. At the same time, I began writing letters. In my neatest cursive, I wrote to every single one of our relatives. I was hoping we could all get together at my house for Labor Day weekend this year. It feels like it's been ages since we've all seen each other, especially after the past few years, and I would so love to see all of your happy, healthy faces. I wrote as if nothing was wrong, as if everything was perfectly normal. But inside, my plan was quietly, methodically taking shape. The grocery shopping, the meal prep, the deep cleaning of every room, airing out the extra blankets and quilts. Michael and Jessica just laughed. "Looks like Mom's in her superhost mode again," they'd say to each other. But for me, the joy of serving them, the simple pleasure of doing things for my family was completely gone. It had been replaced by something else entirely, something cold and determined. On the Saturday of Labor Day weekend, the relatives began to arrive one by one. The front hall filled with cheerful, booming voices. Smiles bloomed on every face as they greeted each other after so long apart. The house was alive again with the familiar sounds of family. Laughter echoed from the entryway, punctuated by loud cries of, "It's been too long." A warm, nostalgic feeling filled the air. Seeing everyone gathered together again was, on its own, a genuinely happy occasion for me. In the living room, Jessica moved about as if she were the lady of the house. "This is a Southwestern-style 7-layered dip," she announced, gesturing to a bowl on the coffee table. "And over here, we have the fried chicken the kids love so much." She presented the food as if she had prepared it all herself. Our relatives, meaning no harm, nodded along. "It all looks wonderful, dear," they said, their praise directed at her. I stood quietly in the corner of the kitchen, my hands resting on a warm teacup, just watching. For decades, I had been the one in charge of this kitchen. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering. It was my cooking that filled these tables. The fact that no one mentioned it, that no one seemed to remember, brought a small, sharp pang of loneliness. But on this day, I had a purpose. Once everyone had taken their seats, once the plates were filled and the initial flurry of conversation began to settle, I quietly stood up. "Everyone," I said, my voice soft but clear, "could I please have your attention for just a moment?" The room instantly fell quiet. From my pocket, I took out the small digital recorder and gently placed it in the center of the dining room table. I had stepped back from the center of things, serving the food, pouring the iced tea, slicing up a watermelon for the children. But now, all eyes were on me. "Thank you all so much for coming all this way to be here," I began. "Today, there is something I would like you all to hear." The air in the room became perfectly still. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the recorder. I'm not trying to accuse anyone of anything, I continued, my voice even. I just want you to hear a few small fragments of my everyday life. I slowly, deliberately pressed the play button. Into the dead silent room, a tinny, disembodied voice began to speak. Honestly, what good is she? All she can really do is cook. It was Jessica's voice, a sound I had often heard from the kitchen. A few of the relatives exchanged startled glances, their eyes wide with surprise. Then, a child's voice followed. Mommy, Grandma smells a little funny. The atmosphere in the room felt as if it had turned to ice. No one made a sound. They could do nothing but listen, their faces frozen. Wouldn't it just be easier if she weren't here? Like, she could make dinner and then just leave. The moment those words filled the air, the tension became electric. I gently reached out and pressed stop. I bowed my head deeply. These words are just a small sample, I said to the silent room. But this has been my normal for the last several years. After a brief pause, I looked up, a gentle smile on my face. I am not a housekeeper whose name happens to be Grandma, I said softly. I have always hoped, and tried, to be family. In the eyes of everyone gathered there, I could see a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and above all, utter confusion. Several people opened their mouths as if to speak, but the words caught in their throats. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. In that silence, I continued, I have spent my years in this house as Grandma. But lately, I feel as though I've started to lose my understanding of what the word family truly means. Of course, I added, I can try to understand how Jessica feels. But I am not a convenient person. I bowed my head once more, then looked around at each of them again. What I wanted to tell you all today, by gathering you here, is that from now on, I intend to take back a little of my own life. Starting next year, I must ask you to hold your holiday gatherings somewhere else. For me, this is the last time. For a second, the air itself seemed to crackle and freeze. Michael and Jessica stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. They said nothing. But then, one of my nieces spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor, you've been putting up with so much all this time, haven't you? Hearing those words, I felt the tension in my shoulders finally release, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Still, I smiled. I've done more than enough. Now, I think it's time I started using my time for myself. That day, for the first time in a very long time, I felt as though I had reclaimed my own place in the world with my own two hands. Later that night, sitting alone under the kitchen light, I brewed a cup of tea for myself and thought, with a clarity that felt brand new, I am not finished yet. And I listened as the deep, quiet sadness that had taken root in my heart slowly began to dissolve. A few days after that fateful gathering, a strange and profound quiet settled over the house. When I woke up in the morning, I found the coffee cups and cereal bowls from the night before stacked neatly on the living room table, but there was no sign of Michael or Jessica. Then, I heard a soft thud from the direction of the front door. When I went to look, I saw several cardboard boxes piled by the entryway. My son and his family must have packed their things that night and left early, the next morning. Without a single word. Not even a goodbye, not one word. A faint whisper of loneliness echoed in my heart. But there was no anger, just a small, hollow space that had opened up deep inside my chest. The day they left, the moment the front door clicked shut with a final, definitive thuds, I instinctively closed my eyes. Normally, that sound would have left a stabbing ache of loneliness in my chest. But that day was different. It felt as if I had finally been able to set down a heavy, burdensome load that I had been carrying on my back for years. The house was utterly still. In the kitchen, there were no voices. Is the coffee ready yet? Could you clear these plates? Those words were gone, and they would not be coming back. I slowly got up and began to wash the few remaining dishes, one by one, drying them with care. The only sound was the gentle rush of water from the faucet, which sounded almost like a lullaby. Beside the sink sat a single, solitary coffee mug. It must have been the last one my son drank from. When I picked it up, a faint, lukewarm warmth still lingered. I would no longer be called Mom, but I would also no longer be treated as the convenient one. I opened a window and let the crisp autumn breeze drift through the room. The cool, clean air made the kitchen curtains dance and sway. As evening fell, I sat on the porch swing. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, and I watched the dappled light filter through the leaves of the old oak tree. An image of him, of my late husband Walter, floated into my mind. I remembered something he'd said years ago, right after we'd finished building this house. "You know," he'd said quietly, "let's make sure this house is a place where our family can always feel safe to come home." Back then, I had simply nodded. But only now, after all these years, did the true depth of his words sink into my soul. So much time had passed. The shape of our family had changed, and my life had not turned out the way I had once imagined. And yet, that small letter from my granddaughter, the picture she drew of Grandma's seat, in that drawing, my presence was real. I was there. I looked up at the twilight sky and whispered in a voice no one could hear, "Walter, it seems there's finally one person who remembers your words." In that instant, I felt a soft breeze brush against my cheek, and it was as if my husband were smiling down at me from heaven. I couldn't help but smile back, a small, genuine smile. This silence was not emptiness. It was the sound of a freedom my heart had finally found. In the middle of the afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a small, single envelope inside. The return address was written in a child's clumsy hand, and a smile immediately touched my lips. I opened the seal carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded into a small square. It was a drawing, made with colored pencils. 4 figures stood in a line. Underneath them, in shaky letters, were the words, "Daddy, Mommy, me, Grandma," and below that, one more sentence, "Next time, let's sit in the chairs together." I held the paper in both hands, as if cupping something precious, and for a long moment I couldn't move. To know that those small hands still saw me as a member of the family. To know that even one person still felt that way, I had no idea how much warmth that could bring to a lonely heart. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath. It's all right now, you don't have to be sorry. Just remembering is more than enough. The next morning, as I stood at the stove making myself a pot of oatmeal, I paused, spoon in hand, and said to the quiet room, "Thank you. Your drawing is my treasure." In the cool morning air, the light streaming through the window gently illuminated the picture, which I had placed on the kitchen table. The warmth of that light felt like a child's smile, gently pushing me forward. Today, like every day, I will pour myself a cup of tea and begin my day in peace. And from somewhere far away, I thought I could almost hear a small voice. "See you later, Grandma." Have you ever been treated by your own son as if you were just the person who does the chores? Have you ever been told, "As long as you're healthy, it's a parent's job to help out," and felt your heart break a little? Have you ever spent a lonely night feeling empty because no one even tasted the meal you poured your heart into making? If so, I want you to write this in the comments below. I don't need to be thanked. I need to be seen as your mother. And if you have ever, even for a moment, thought to yourself, "My aging mother should just put up with it," I'm asking you to please share this story. There are so many women in this world who are on the verge of giving up on being a mother, their voices unheard and their pain unnoticed. Your share can help become their voice. Finally, if you believe that it's never too late to say, "Thank you, Mom," please subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, and leave a comment. We will continue to tell stories like this, stories that might squeeze your heart, but that will also light a small, warm lamp in the deepest part of your soul.